Derek Fildebrandt, publisher of the Western Standard. You're watching The Pipeline. Today is March 25th, 2025. I'm joined by my usual co-hosts, Western Standard opinion editor, Nigel Hannaford.
Good to see you again.
To my left today. And Western Standard senior Alberta columnist, Cory Morgan.
Good afternoon.
All right, well, we'll be talking about the first week on the job of Prime Minister Mark Carney. How's he done? What has he done to try and reset the narrative around his Liberal government, and how where are things going? And on the flip side of that coin, we're going to talk about Pierre Poilievre and the Conservatives. They've dipped in the polls as the Conservatives, as the Liberals have surged. Can he bounce back? What does he need to do? And we're going to be talking about a very strange move in British Columbia, where the BC NDP government has introduced an act that more or less suspends democracy for 2 years, taking most power away from the legislature, passing it directly to the executive. Pretty scary stuff that you normally see on the History Channel, not in a Canadian legislature. Before we get going, though, I want to thank our sponsor. This episode of The Pipeline is sponsored by New World Precious Metals, based right here in Alberta. Years of inflationary money printing and rising debt have decimated the average Canadian's savings. Gold and silver are the only currencies that have held their value for thousands of years. Last year saw 30% gains. New World Precious Metals offers unique platforms to help protect and grow your hard-earned wealth with silver and gold. Check them out at newworldpm.com. They're a great sponsor of the Western Standard, but they're helping us out. So if you go help them out, you're helping to support the program. Go to newworldpm.com. All right. So, Nigel, first, Mark Carney has been Prime Minister for a hair over a week now. He's been trying to set a new tone, a new image for the government. Why don't you set it up?
So, anytime that somebody comes into office without a seat and in the expectation of an election coming soon, first job is to set the tone, try and talk about the way that your administration is going to look. It's interesting that Mr. Carney chose to go to Europe. He went to see the founding nations of Great Britain and France, and then he went up north to Iqaluit to see the founding nations, as he put it. We've always had this idea that, Canada is based on the English and the French, and he is very specifically drawing a connection with Indigenous Canadians. That's not an accident. It's not an afterthought or a fortuitous thing. That's very intentional. What is also interesting is that he did not go to see President Trump. He was asked why not, and he said, "I'll go when the time is right." I think the word he used was appropriate. And certainly it didn't go so well when Mr. Trudeau went down there. There could well be a good reason to just let things lay low for a while he assembles the alliances that he means to foster in Europe. There was a poll that came out indicating that 40% of Canadians would enjoy joining the European Common Market.
I think it said European Union.
The European, well, that's
Common Market's
sort of a passé, but, like they have an orientation towards Europe, which is kind of concerning because, if you think back to the speech that Vice President Vance made at the Munich Security Conference recently, Europe has got a lot of problems, and they're very good at overlooking democracy when it suits them. European nations have been known to set aside elections that they don't like the result of. So I'm kind of concerned that that feeds the sense that we already have of the Liberals as being very, very interested in top-down control. Other than that, he has booked a Zoom call this Friday with the premiers, I presume to talk about a common approach to Mr. Trump, and he has also made some significant announcements about northern defense. That's what he did up in Iqaluit. he is trying to signal that he is dealing with the things that concerned President Trump when he initially talked about tariffs. He has even come out and said that he thinks fentanyl is a serious problem. So it's kind of interesting how he is conforming to what he thinks is expected of him by an increasingly conservative electorate, and one that is absolutely fed up with his predecessor and everything that Mr. Trudeau stood for. Real change of tack there.
Cory, this is, I mean, our non-Alberta listeners and viewers probably won't get this as much, but I'm getting real Jim Prentice vibes from Mark Carney here, both in demeanor and presentation, you know, very button-up, businessman-like. You know, it's not tongue stuck out and silly socks, Justin. This is a serious man. He is business. You know, when both came to office, their parties were in the absolute doghouse in the polls. And you know, when Jim Prentice came in, he identified some really easy things to do that had pissed the electorate off. You know, he had abusive planes by his predecessor, Alison Redford. Well, the planes are sold. Carbon tax. Everyone hates the carbon tax. The Liberals are not going to get reelected with the carbon tax. He at least claims to have. He signed a fake executive order. It was a prop. But Canadians don't really know the difference. There's no such thing as an executive order in Canada. The Prime Minister doesn't sign something and then it happens. Actually, the Governor General signs things to actually make something happen. But you know, eliminating that real sliver or that sort of the pea under the mattress that was upsetting voters. I'm seeing a lot of the same thing here. Jim Prentice's big mistake, though, is he didn't go right away because he brought his party right back up at the polls, but then gave people enough time to remember, oh, yeah, we still hate the Alberta PCs, and they went down to a historic defeat. Mark Carney looks like he's going to call an election within the week here, so he's probably not going to maybe he won't give people enough time to remember that they still hate the Liberals. What do you see in terms of parallels with Prentice or other leaders who have come in a kind of a similar set of circumstances?
Yeah, I mean, it's a similar balance, and if it turns out like Prentice, it'll be a curve. And over the course of a campaign, I mean, that's when you really find out who's who and what's going on. I mean, a different factor with Prentice, too, though, was the disastrous floor crossing that he arranged that sort of repulsed voters on both the Wild Rose and the PCs, and just was a catastrophe all around. But, I mean, they both have the same thing. They have to walk the line to say, I'm the leader of this party, but we're not that party anymore. And you're surrounding yourself with the same people, but saying they've learned because I am now in the head. I mean, you've still got Melanie Joly flubbing up international affairs. You've still got Guilbeault in a different cabinet position, but he's still there. It's retreads. So he's really, it's working for the short term. We'll see if it works for the long term. It won't be easy. He's going to get a lot more scrutiny in a general election than he dealt with the love end of the Liberal leadership race, if you even want to call it that. So we'll see if he maintains it. But, you know, as I was saying earlier on my show today, too, part of the strategy, though, is just keeping him out of sight, which isn't a good sign of things. I mean, it shows that they aren't confident in him. I mean, right now is when, as Nigel said, he went over to meet with European leaders, and he's been up to Iqaluit. Well, Canadians would kind of like to get to know who the heck you are, too, because aside from people like ourselves, most people don't really know who Carney is. And when the time comes, this is going to be the time when people are going to be looking at him and saying, do I like this man, what he's about, what he's standing for? And hiding him is just going to foster mistrust, I think.
Yeah. Well, they have hiding him, Nigel. He has during his leadership campaign and now as Prime Minister, he generally doesn't talk. He bans anyone who's not regime media. So if you're not funded by the Liberal government, you're not allowed in at all. And then
even if you are,
you
would get shut down.
Well, we had, you know what? Actually, let's just play this quick clip of Mark Carney and Rosemary Barton.
Are you saying you are not open to any conflict of interest?
Yes.
Someone spent most of his life in the private sector. There's no possible conflict of interest in your assets. It's very difficult to believe.
Look inside yourself, Rosemary. mean, you start from a prior of conflict and ill will. I have served in the private sector. I have stood up for Canada. I have left my roles in the private sector at a time of crisis for our country. I'm complying with all the rules. Your line of questioning is trying to invent new rules. I'm complying with the rules that Parliament has laid out and the responsibilities of the Ethics Commissioner. And I will continue to comply with those rules.
I mean, Rosemary Barton does not exactly have a reputation as a fierce conservative partisan media. She is one of the stars of the CBC, loathed for a long time by conservatives as being largely in the pocket for the Liberals. She gives them a pretty soft time. And that was not a particularly hard question. That's a question that he would clearly have to see coming. His people must have briefed him on, here's the potential questions you're going to get, here's some answers. And it just gets right under his skin. He might be surging in the polls right now, making the Liberal Party at least competitive again. But this is not a man who's ever been exposed to the disinfectant of the sunlight in the media. I mean, if we're going to see a lot of that, I think he'll probably wilt on the campaign.
I think he will. Look into your heart, Mr. Carney. You know, he has been one of life's well-rewarded people, and they're not used to getting questions about what they do, what they think, what they feel. And to be very direct, what Rosemary Barton had been asking was about potential conflicts of interest, something that the Conservatives have been driving very hard, and that actually remains to be thoroughly examined, and no doubt the election campaign will bring that out. The question that I wish that she had asked, and which he would have found extremely hard to answer, was this: Mr. Carney, when your predecessor, Mr. Trudeau, told the Germans and told Canada that there was no business case for exporting natural gas, were you, sir, advising him at that point? I would love to hear his answer.
Well, if he would not ban Western Standard reporters from his press media availabilities, perhaps he could get that kind of question. There was a lot illuminating in his response there. Look, I came back for the private. The way his tone and the way he put it, it sounded like, why are you giving me a hard time? I'm doing Canada a favor.
Yeah.
I mean, come on. This is Mark Carney. This is the Carney. And I'm taking a break from making this money to come back and do Canada a favor. I mean, in a sense, that should be somewhat of what we're looking for. It's public service, people who have accomplished things outside of politics. That's something he does have over Pierre Poilievre. That is in the plus column for him.
People like Elon Musk, you might think.
Yeah. But Elon was very well prepared that he is going to take some shit kicking.
Yeah.
When you step into the political sphere, guess what? Whenever aura of untouchability you had around yourself, that's gone. And Mark Carney, Cory, seems totally baffled that he no longer has that bubble wrap of being, the governor of the Bank of Canada around him. That he's, because the governor of the Bank of Canada is, at least among some people, untouchable. You're not supposed to criticize the governor. Governor Carney. And it just, his response to that sounded like, why give me such a hard time? I'm doing you guys a favor. I'm taking a break from making money to help you guys out. Leave me alone.
Yeah, that, budding Messiah complex might not resonate well with voters in the course of the next 30 days. I mean, we expect at least a facade of being humble. And just, you take it as an honor to be able to serve in that, not I'm doing you a favor by serving in that role. And he's gotten it backwards. And I'm certain there must have been some cringing strategists behind closed doors that no, please don't frame it that way, Mr. Carney. I think they're going to try and improve him. I think that's part of why they're keeping him hidden, because he hasn't been through the trenches. He hasn't run through an election, and he's going to have to thicken that skin and, take the critique that's going to come with it. He's clearly not accustomed to it. He's a smart man. He's not, he's experienced with public exposure, but not the same type as when you're standing there in an election campaign when the buzzards are
He's
swooping,
been a combatant.
and even he's discovering on media they can try and kind of get you on a question or two. It's just the way it goes, and it doesn't bode well for the beginning of this. And again, I'm just wondering how long he's going to keep kicking that election can down the road.
And I'll put this to either of you. Other than the carbon half of the consumer half of the carbon tax, not the industrial half, I should say 2/3 of it is actually industrial. Other than that, there really does not appear to have been any significant change to who is what's actually changed in this government, and most especially the people. All the key advisors around him are Trudeau's guys. His office is staffed by Trudeau's guys. Even his cabinet, the front-facing team he's showing, 97% of Carney's cabinet was in Trudeau's cabinet, and 100% of them are obviously Liberal MPs elected under Trudeau. Whatever else he's doing to try and set a different tone and image of the government, the people around him have not changed at all. Just maybe some of them have moved around chairs. Guilbeault was in one, now he's in another. But it's the same team.
Absolutely. And that's what the Conservatives are going to be reminding the public of whenever the election is called. And it's going to be very hard for the Liberals to dodge, because as they campaign, to the degree that they are known at all, people will recognize them. And the only difference is Mr. Carney, with a very different kind of message, yet one that is not really believable. Everybody who is at all interested knows that Mark Carney is the ultimate Davos man. He is utterly committed, and has been all his life, all his public life anyway, to the fighting global warming, to reducing carbon emissions. And all of a sudden, this signature policy of a carbon tax, oh, you don't like that? That's electorally unpopular? Oh, we can get rid of that then. Up until now, that's been a key plank in the Liberal approach to discourage carbon use by making it more expensive. So I think people are really going to have a struggle with the new look Carney.
Well, and then people have said, the Liberals have said, this isn't just a policy preference of, what should the marginal tax rate be. Carbon tax is life or death. Remember Mark Holland?
Oh, yeah.
Carney, Trudeau, Holland, Guilbeault, they've all said the same thing. No carbon tax, the world ends. Literally.
And it is burning. We're all going to die.
We're going to burn to death. I mean, if unless you guys were lying to us, then you should stick with your unpopular policy, because the world will end. Shouldn't you at least go down on the point of principle? Go down to an honorable defeat on the point of principle that will stop the earth from burning up? So you at least say, I told you so when it's all done?
See, that's what Conservatives will do. They'll go down to their deaths on a point of principle. These people don't do that.
I know what you mean. All right. So we're going to switch it to the other side here, because there's no sense in really even talking about the NDP anymore. They're done. They're out. They're out of the race. They're just dead. They have transitioned themselves out of competitiveness. Poilievre still, the best polls have him with a small lead now. We're not going to talk about Ecos, because Ecos is drunk in possibly more than one way. But, even other non-Ecos polls that are a bit more credible, many of them have the Liberals leading, even in potentially majority government territory. Cory, why don't you kind of set it up? Where's Poilievre right now, and what's he got to do?
He's got to rebrand and pivot. They've spent 6 months building an election on two things. One was the Chinese election interference thing that the Liberals ragged the puck long enough on. The Canadians just got sick of it, and it's just considered unresolved, but they don't want to hear about it anymore. And the carbon tax, that bullet was taken out of his gun.
They've been building this for 3 years.
Oh, certainly. I'm just saying, when they're starting to think you're getting up towards election tax, I've seen some of the recent ads, and they're still on the carbon tax because, hey, we've already paid for it. We made the film. We might as well get them out right now because it's done. But they've got to find a new corner. And I know people are already saying, well, yes, but Carney's going to increase the industrial and emitters tax. Well, we know from campaigning, if you got to spend 3 minutes on the doorstep to explain how he's shuffled it, you've already made their eyes glaze over and they're indifferent. They see the price at the pump. They see the price on their heating bill. And Carney has said he's going to take that away. It's no longer a good wedge to hit them with. I mean, he's going to have to expose Carney for who he is carefully. That's the thing. Can you trust Carney to do the things he's saying he's going to do? Can you trust the pivot from these Liberals? And do you really believe them, as I said? And plus, if they were married to their policies, what kind of principles are that when they just throw them away when it's not politically expedient? Those sorts of points. But those are hard to get out to Canadians in a short bite. So I'm certain their strategists are just hammering down, trying to figure out where can we really get them. I think they've really got to target Carney. And the other factor, of course, is the Trump factor, which there's not much you can do about with that. You just try to weather it the best you can and move forward.
Nigel, I'm going to borrow from Matt Gurney at The Line here, who put the Liberal surge in the polls. He coined it as, or described it, sorry, as a sugar high. It's an artificial. People are kind of just projecting onto Carney, like very possibly. Not saying it's not possible that they could win if the sugar high could last throughout a 5-week campaign, and maybe it gets the Liberals government again. But he's described it as a sugar high, that it's going to crash. It's not, it's built on a very weak foundation. What are your thoughts about how sustainable the Liberal surge has been here?
I'm reminded of the 2011 campaign with Michael Ignatieff, who has certain things in common with Mr. Carney, that he is a public intellectual. He is a man who's very seldom faced any significant professional pushback, unlike a politician. And yes, the new man is installed. Everyone says, oh, good, no more Mr. Trudeau. Now we can vote Liberal again. Then they listen to Mr. Carney, and he's already made his first blunder. We spoke about the Rosemary Barton incident before. It's not a killer, but it certainly sets the wrong tone, especially with women. But as he gets out onto the trail and he says what he really thinks, if he is allowed to say what he really thinks, the gloss is going to wear off very quickly. And most importantly, it will wear off in the spontaneous reactions when he's asked a question and he gives an answer that he wishes he hadn't later. So I think, Cory, you made a sort of a waving motion that it'll go like that and start to fall off. I think that was prophetic. That's what awaits Mr. Carney. I'm not saying he won't win, but I do say that whatever the support that he seems to command right now, he shouldn't rely on it, that it'll be with him through thick and thin. It's his to lose.
Well, there's something to be said with polls, too. I mean, the electorate is volatile right now. I mean, you rarely see polls spike or drop the way they have. And if they've jumped that quickly...
Never seen them like this.
And if they've popped up that quickly, that's not strong, slowly built, stable support. That's not a foundation. That's people who are being reactive. And they can react just as quickly the other way. So that this game is far from done.
And the other thing, Cory, is Poilievre has not yet begun to fight. If you think about it, why would you be going out with your key announcements right now when you don't know for sure whether the election will be in a week or in 6 months? Obviously, you're going to hold back the best you've got until at the right time to deploy it. And so people who say, oh, look, the polls are off for Mr. Poilievre, well, I mean, yes, they are, but that doesn't mean they're going to stay that way. An election is not decided before it's even been called.
No, certainly not. And as you said, yeah, they've got to be keeping their powder dry. And you don't have your best bombshells at the start of the campaign. You want to make sure shortly before people are going to start at the advance polls.
I mean, you mark my words, Cory, the research department in the Conservative Party has got stuff on Carney that they haven't even hinted that they have yet. And when that comes out, it'll make it that much more difficult for Mr. Carney to hang on to whatever lead he may presently have.
We'll see. I mean, they held on to blackface for a while with Trudeau, and it still didn't seem to knock them out.
The Conservatives didn't have that.
Or that's right, the media said on it.
No, that was a U.S. media.
Yes.
That was U.S. media. Even the Canadian media didn't fight.
Mid-election, it just seems hard to dislodge. But again, that's different then. I mean, the Liberals were still at a stable trajectory. Not this bizarre spike that we're at. And yes, he could be knocked off his perch pretty quick.
New office pool. What are the chances that Mark Carney did blackface?
pretty zero out. Yeah.
I wouldn't have bet on Justin Trudeau. I wouldn't have bet on anybody doing it before. Like, I grew up in small towns where we literally didn't have other people, and we all knew you don't do black.
There's different personalities and people have less restraint. I mean, you just... Now, I've never done it, thankfully. But I mean, I had my...
That's what you said in your job interview, but...
I had my partying weirdness throughout the 90s and many other events that thankfully the internet wasn't around for yet.
So if any of our viewers can provide documentary evidence of...
But you see, the chances... a bounty on racy Cory photos right now. The $10 for a good photo of Cory.
The chances of those stuffs from a man like me, though, are a little higher. For somebody like Mark Carney, who's kind of been in the more cloistered world and is a man who just seems a little more composed, or a lot less likely. Never impossible. You never know. I mean, it's always, as they say, he seems so normal, you know. And then the pictures of them in the later Hosen whipping somebody with sweat spaghetti or something pop out, and it changes everything.
Well, that was an odd place to go.
I heard it somewhere. It's on a bathroom wall or something.
Maybe it was Gutfeld.
That must be it.
I'm gonna have to transition the topic real quickly here before this turns against me. We're going to turn to British Columbia now and bring in Western Standards, the Western Standards BC Bureau Chief and Managing Editor of West Coast Standard, Jared Yager from beautiful Vancouver. Jared, the BC NDP government, which is I think it's technically been quasi-minority position. It's relying on NDP support, but they're bringing forward a bill now essentially to neuter the legislature and concentrate all emergency powers in the executive for 2 years. Why don't you just describe the situation a little bit more?
Okay, so yeah, it's Bill 7, and it was proposed, to deal with the threats from Trump and the United States. But it's been described by the BC Conservatives as the most undemocratic, power-grabbing legislation in BC history. And it's pretty far-reaching, deals with opening interprovincial trade barriers, government procurement, and essentially anything to do with the tariff response. And the big thing to note is that it gives members of the BC NDP cabinet the ability to introduce measures to the legislature, and with the BC NDP's majority, with the help of the Greens, they're almost sure to be passed. And so it's got a lot of people worried here in BC, not just Conservatives, but anyone worried about authoritarianism and what that could mean for future governments.
That it just rings such a good. It rings a bell. I think we've seen this. I've seen this one before. Where have we seen this one before? Here, there's a little clip we want to play here.
I love democracy. I love the Republic.
We won't play the full clip, but I don't expect that the NDP in BC is planning to abolish the legislature and build a Death Star or open camps of any kind. But it's disturbing. It's very, very odd. And one of the oddest things to me about this to me, Jared, is that the BC why don't you talk about the role of the Greens here? Because the Greens have some leverage right now because of the very narrow seat count, the extremely narrow seat count in the BC legislature. And that gives them leverage, but it only gives them leverage with confidence votes in the legislature. Why would the BC, where are the BC Greens at with this?
That's a really good question, and I haven't seen too much from them. But the bill, it's only at first reading right now, and the legislature is on spring break. So I'm sure when they come back, the Greens will have something to say.
So we haven't heard anything from them?
Not that I've seen, no.
Speaking of, I've seen this one before. The BC Greens, in a very similar situation under John Horgan, they propped him up, and he screwed them. He cut their throats at the first opportunity. During COVID, his numbers went up because enough people liked the kind of authoritarian measures he was imposing on British Columbians, and he saw an opportunity for majority government. He ripped up his deal with the Greens. NDP like to rip up the deal. That's their line. He ripped up their deal, called a snap election, and Greens lost, I think, one of the 3 seats, and they lost all of their leverage in the legislature and in the government. Why on earth would these guys do this to themselves again, and actually then even weaken their own hand further by? Why would they even consider? Why would they contemplate supporting this legislation? I can't imagine that David Eby has brought this bill forward without first making sure he's got the support of the NDP to do it.
I'm actually just seeing here now, the BC Greens, they said they want amendments to make sure there's guardrails in place to make sure the NDP doesn't, override too much. But yeah, they didn't say what the amendments would be, and those will be tabled once the legislature comes back in session.
But Nigel, why the BC Greens have serious leverage here? The BC NDP essentially need them to govern. Why the hell would they give away their chips?
I don't think they have. I think they have used their leverage. The provisions. This was a writer in the Western Standard just yesterday made the point that although Bill 7 would provide for cabinet override on just about all legislation, even down to the level of imposing tolls on roads, the thing that it does not do is to in any way allow the province to push ahead on the big resource developments, which are, of course, the hope of more revenues for BC, and more jobs, and a stronger Canada. We're here having a discussion about, Mr. Carney, you need to build more pipelines. In BC, Bill 7 is justified as a means to protect the economy, but the natural resource sector is still excluded from that. So, what our writer said, this contracts the purpose of the massive new powers of Bill 7 and adds to the threats posed to BC's own LNG industry that are already emerging in Alaska. Hesitating to support the resource sector at this moment squanders an opportunity. So I think that the discussion has already been had between the NDP and the Greens, and they have said something like, we'll back you up, but don't you use this to boost the economy, especially on the green issues we care about.
Maybe so, but in terms of political leverage, Cory, the NDP's leverage is in its ability to keep it in the government in power or vote it out of power in non-confidence. And if the legislature isn't required to sit very much because most power is just now hyper concentrated in the executive, the cabinet, and the premier, that seems to undermine the leverage the Greens have here, because they're not in a formal coalition, they're not in the cabinet. But I don't know. What's the Greens' play here?
Well, as Nigel said, there might have been a deal already made. I mean, okay, fine, you're going to do your thing, but we'll do it back there. I mean, they're fresh out of an election. The Greens, they're much like the NDP federally. They've got very concentrated support. The best they can hope for, actually, in achieving power is being a kingmaker in a minority government, and they're sitting there. So if they
why would they vote themselves out of that by giving all the power to the premier?
Well, as Nigel said, they haven't given all of it to them at this point. And the Greens, particularly the modern Greens, I mean, all over the world, they're sort of different, but the ones in Canada tend to be extreme left. They are authoritarians. They aren't, instinctively getting their backs up when they hear of these things like a libertarian like me would. I mean, I couldn't stand it if a conservative government did something like this. But Greens, they're not far removed from the NDP. They just have more of an environmental fixation.
I don't know. Authoritarians of different stripes have one thing in common, or a few things in common. But one of the things they have in common is that they're only okay with authoritarianism for themselves in power, not a different party. And this is the Greens supporting authoritarianism for an ideologically like-minded party like the NDP, but it's a different party. It's not themselves benefiting, at least that I see out of this. I don't know.
So there is a sunset clause on this. Jared, is it 2027?
It's May 2027, yeah.
Yeah.
Which is well into EB's
Maybe they
third
can live
term.
with that. Sorry, what were you saying?
It's well into EB's third term, so it's not too soon.
Yeah. Okay, well, we're
Third year.
gonna rest that. All right, well, we're going to wrap the BC discussion there. Thank you, Jared. And we're going to turn to our parting shots. Nigel.
Well, you know, as an old space fan on Star Trek forward through NASA and moon landings and all the rest of it, I watched with peculiar interest as the SpaceX company retrieved the stranded astronauts. Watched it splash down, had great satisfaction from seeing that. So Musk has kind of stepped in to save NASA from an awkward situation. The original plan had collapsed. SpaceX to the rescue. Elon Musk is a hero. And I've found it absolutely amazing that a U.S. senator who is a Democrat, but more to the point is the kind of person I tend to respect, a former Navy captain, a former astronaut himself, a frequent visitor to the International Space Station, took that moment to post a video in which he pointed the camera at himself with the Tesla car that he owned in the background and said, I'm getting rid of this because I think Elon Musk is an unworthy person and I don't want to drive a car made by an unworthy person. We'll play
So he hears about Henry Ford.
So then he went and bought a Chevrolet Tahoe, which I would have thought he would have bought for his wife. So anyway, the long and the short of it is that there is something like this is a man I could have respected. I could have followed into the trenches. The Democrat Party has got hold of him and they've done something to his brain. And now, basically, I think he's what he called Elon Musk.
Mm-hmm.
You'll see from the clip.
So, we want to show it?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. That's the.
Let's run the clip.
Every time I get in this car in the last 60 days or so, it reminds me of just how much damage Elon Musk and Donald Trump is doing to our country. Talking about slashing Social Security, cutting health care benefits for poor people, for seniors. It's one bad thing after the next. He's firing veterans. I'm a veteran, so I have a really hard time driving around in this thing. What matters is, doing the right thing. I think it's time to get rid of it. Elon Musk kind of turned out to be an asshole, and I don't want to be driving the car built and designed by an asshole.
Well, that narrows it a lot because a lot of car designers historically have been assholes.
I recommend he gets a Volkswagen.
Yeah.
If he doesn't like that, he can go for a Ford. All right, Cory.
I got a whole lot of Rosie. It's just been very fascinating to watch this pile on with Rosemary Barton. I mean, she's been well known to be quite enamored with Justin Trudeau. Years of her shallowly hiding just her admiration of him during interviews or even when she would speak of him. I mean, she was on the brink of tears when he announced he was going to resign. There was the big huzzah she put out when they were leading in the polls once years ago. And, okay, I think she's trying to reestablish herself. Maybe that's why she wanted to make sure to be a little pointed and critical at a news conference with Carney to show, look, I can hold Liberals to account. I can ask some tougher questions. But it wasn't so much that on her part, but the response. And not even just Carney. Okay, politicians get a little crabby. You've had a bad day. You've been getting picked at and so on. And he's not one used to that either. Okay, that was pretty condescending and did show a bad attitude towards a woman journalist. But the enraged reaction from the TrueAnon, from the liberal types online. There's petitions to have her fired. They are furious. They believe she is unfit for the CBC. The hysteric, and it is hysteric reaction to one question. This woman's been in there patting the Liberals for 10 years, and she asked one question, and you nutcases are now screaming for her to be torn from her role. It also shows how entitled Liberals are, feeling that they are above critique, above being questioned. It's just fascinating to watch. It really is. I mean, they can't even write that off as a one-off. They believe she should be ripped out of the crown, Mother Corp, and forever stricken from the roles of journalism. It's just unreal to watch.
It's so bad that I think the Liberals should support defunding the CBC.
That's what I said online too. Yeah, you better just wipe the whole bunch.
Yeah, you can't fix it. There's too many Rosemary Bartons. You're going to have to just defund the whole thing, guys. All right, mine. I'm gonna get some pushback from some of you guys, but I think it's time that Alberta Premier Danielle Smith calls the by-election in Edmonton Strathcona to allow NDP leader and former Calgary Mayor Naheed Nenshi to run and then almost certainly win a seat and enter the legislature. For reasons I just don't really understand, the United Conservative Party in Alberta is just not calling this by-election. That was Rachel Notley's old seat. There is a 100% chance the NDP are going to win it. The Conservatives could run Mother Teresa, and the NDP could run Lenin. Actually, that might improve their vote in that riding. But they could run Vladimir Lenin or Joseph Stalin, and the NDP is going to win that seat. The Conservatives have no hope of winning it. And, I mean, he's the duly elected leader of the NDP, but he's not yet the duly elected leader of the opposition. He has to be a member of the Legislative Assembly to do that. The Conservatives were, I think, rightfully taunting him that he couldn't get a member of his party to resign and open up a seat for him for some time. Well, that's finally done. The Conservatives are dragging their heels on this. I think it would show a little bit of class and statesmanship on the part of the Conservatives to call the damn by-election. He's going to win it anyway. Let him get into the legislature and then have at it. I want to see Nenshi and Smith go toe-to-toe. Let's get on with it already. So, Alberta Conservatives watching, snap. Call the by-election. All right. Well, that's it for today's show. Remember, if you're not yet a member of the Western Standard, stop freeloading. You need to be right now. Go to westernstandard.news, click on subscribe. It's only $10 a month or $100 a year for unlimited access to all Western Standard content. You'll get past the pesky paywall, and you'll be supporting one of the very few media left in Canada that is not taking Justin Trudeau and Mark Carney's federal media bailout money. Thank you very much for joining us today, and God bless.
What does success mean to you? Peace of mind? Financial freedom? Generational wealth? What do you see in your future? Investing in gold and silver can help you get there. Through our trading partners, New World Precious Metals offers safe, affordable, secure international accounts to help you meet your unique financial goals. Connect with one of our experienced team members. Invest in gold and silver today.